Last episode taught me two things. First, the Bestial Devout still has the potential to become extremely unpleasant. Second, almost everything I remember about Convergence should now be treated as unverified information. We survived Nerigis, we acquired the Kanabo, we introduced the duelist to the newly established Redemption list. And today we're going to be doing something considerably more dangerous. Explore while assuming I know where the hell I'm going. The plan is to work through more of Limgrave, pick up some levels and upgrades, and eventually make our way toward the Troll. Nothing complicated, which means something will obviously go wrong. Before heading deeper into Limgrave, I decided to swing by the church and pick up some very useful items, but there was a knight's cavalry still wandering around nearby. Technically, I could probably fight him at this point. Practically, he can also just wait. One benefit of being the protagonist is that bosses are apparently required to remain exactly where you left them until you feel emotionally prepared to deal with their nonsense. We'll get to him, eventually. Possibly when I have enough health to survive a firm disagreement with him. On the way, we find a graveyard, and like any responsible tarnish, I immediately begin robbing the dead. Graveyards are always worth checking. Sometimes you find runes, sometimes you find crafting materials, sometimes you find something completely ridiculous, and sometimes you disturb every bat, skeleton, and local form of wildlife within a 3-mile radius. Today appeared to be one of those days. Eventually, I looked forward to Fort Haight, and made the same decision that causes roughly 70% of problems in these games. Yeah, why not? Let's do this. I remember Fort Haight fairly well, which after episode 1 should have been my first warning. Still, I need runes right now. There was a golden seed nearby, and somewhere inside was presumably something worth stealing, so naturally we invade the castle. For justice, or loot, mostly loot. At first, Fort Haight looked relatively normal. Rats, soldiers, people throwing things at me from inconvenient elevations. Standard castle operations, you know? Then somebody on the roof began demonstrating an uncomfortable level of accuracy with fire pots. There are enemies in Elden Ring who fight with legendary swords forged by gods. And somehow the guy throwing pottery from 3 stories up remains one of the biggest threats. Eventually, my health had reached a point where conventional wisdom suggested leaving, so naturally, I continued deeper into the castle, because we remained committed to the primary character stat of this run, unhealthy confidence. There was still a Blood Knight waiting. I had almost no health, he had considerably more, but we had something he didn't, a complete disregard of sensible risk management. It wasn't a clean fight, wasn't an elegant fight, but Fort Haight now belongs to me. Kenneth can file whatever paperwork he feels is necessary on that. Fort Haight also gave us something more important than ownership rights. More runes. And Convergence handles these almost like little packages of build possibilities. Beast abilities, lightning, order, water, different schools that can push a character in completely different directions. And this is where I start seeing what the Bestial Devout might actually become. The original plan was mostly beast abilities and strength, but now lightning is sitting there looking very interesting. Faith is already part of the build. The Kanabo obviously wants strength, which means we're slowly drifting towards some kind of violent strength faith paladin build, except our holy weapon is a giant stick or short sword. I'm comfortable with that right now. And we find someone I do remember, a guardian. And this is exactly why I like to replay Convergence. There are changes that exploration actually feels uncertain a little bit again when you go down and remember the base game versus the other games. Now, I remembered that most of his full set, but I do know he had to hit hard. But I didn't know what was going to deal with sometimes. So we performed the traditional From Software scientific method on testing him. We hit him and set him see what happens. I eventually learned very useful discovery. He bleeds very excellently. Second discovery, he also can heal himself when he goes into the next phase. Less fun. Then his also weapon changes, his attack changes, and suddenly what looked like a straightforward encounter starts developing opinions. At this point, I was mostly just trying to map his moves out. He had big swings, good range, fast retreat, and apparently also poisonous gas. Maybe he was just farting a lot. Which is an impressive tactical development until you realize the boss basically weaponized farting. Convergence truly offers something for every build. The Guardian gave us some tools, and shortly afterward we reached a third church, which opened up even more options. Order spells, more lightning abilities, electrified armament, more faith-based tools. And that's when the direction of this character started becoming clearer. We have a Bestial Devout first. I want the beast abilities to remain the identity of the build, but there's absolutely no reason we can't occasionally cover our weapons with lightning or various other things like faith or order and anything like that, or holy weapons. There are very few problems in fantasy that become worse than electrifying a club. And then from somewhere nearby came the unmistakable voice of Fort Haight, a man requesting rescue while introducing himself with enough titles to suggest the rescue should probably include administrative fees. The important thing we got from him was a golden seed. Kenneth can have his castle back later if he somehow resurrects himself. Maybe. We haven't really finalized the property dispute from earlier. Next came Limgrave Tunnels. I remember this dungeon, at least I thought I did. Normally that statement would provide some level of confidence, but by this point in the playthrough, it should probably trigger some emergency lighting going on. I could have grabbed a lantern first, but I could have upgraded the Kanabo. I could have probably actually done this properly. Instead, I just walked inside, because preparation is apparently something future me deals with later. Almost immediately, something feels a bit different. The enemies weren't what I expected. The miners weren't where I expected. There were dogs, there were beastmen, and then at some point I realized Convergence hadn't simply adjusted the dungeon, it had apparently hired new contractors for all the dungeons. Eventually we find another beastman, but this time he has a boomerang, which is not a sentence I remember saying during the original Limgrave tunnel. We did eventually kill him and received 1 smithing stone. Was it worth it? Probably not. But we have committed ourselves emotionally to this. Things get a little bit more confusing. The elevator doesn't work. The expected route wasn't there. I could see clearly where places I was supposed to reach. I simply had no idea how Convergence wanted me to reach them at first. At this point, the run briefly stopped being Elden Ring and became middle-aged man searches dark room for staircase. Eventually, I do spot a ledge, barely visible, down the way. It's I can see the same one as normal, but it's just harder to see because I don't have my lantern. Which means I just spent several minutes accusing the dungeon of being broken when the actual problem was just my vision. The elevator system itself had been destroyed. This wasn't just an enemy replacement, the dungeon geometry had actually changed. That's something I don't remember Convergence doing nearly this aggressively last time I played. And honestly, I like it. Now memory gives me just enough information to be confidently lost. From there, we worked our way through more beastmen, different attacks, different placements, lightning, and projectiles, and by this point the build was starting to feel better, the Kanabo was starting to do Kanabo things, bestial abilities were filling some gaps, and we're beginning to get enough survivability that every fight no longer feels like somebody forgot to finish my health bar. It's progress, baby. Eventually we do reach the troll. This was another enemy I do remember, so before entering I made sure to carefully optimize everything with my physic, equipment, buff strategies. Just kidding, I actually just walked in because fighting the giant looked like fun. We remain a very professional operation here. But the basic plan against trolls really hasn't changed much. Stay near their legs, avoid big swings, punish openings, and occasionally remember that attacks have secondary explosions before standing directly inside of them. Which I remembered that mechanic approximately 1 second too late. Still counts, I guess. Eventually down he went, and this time the reward mattered. Another beast rune, more abilities, more pieces of the actual build. Which meant I was finally time to stop wandering around hitting things and do something dangerously close to actually planning stuff. Back outside, the Bestial Devout finally started taking shape, with new beast spells, more vigor, more strength, and most importantly, Kanabo upgrades. +1, +2, +3, now we're talking, because there are 2 distinct stages of weapon science. Stage 1, can I hit this thing? Stage 2, what if this thing were considerably more mathematically bigger? Science will continue testing this theory. Then came the talismans, healing options, carry weight options, damage options, all kinds of combinations that could eventually make this build ridiculous. And this is where Convergence becomes dangerous. Not because any individual item necessarily breaks the game, it's because you start seeing how some pieces start to interact. 2 had new weapon bonuses, consecutive attacks, damage reduction, healing, strength, bestial abilities. Eventually these systems stop being individual bonuses and start becoming conspiracies. So for now, though, I went with the 2-handed bonus. Now we're going to be using the Kanabo constantly. It fits the playstyle, and more damage from a straight sword seems consistent with our broader academic research. And I think we're moving on now. Episode 1 was mostly about discovering how Convergence had changed. Episodes 2 showed me just how deep those changes go. New bosses, new layouts, new enemy placements, more build options than I remember, and enough new spells and equipment that the Bestial Devout is starting to become something more interesting than a man who found a heavy object. We're not legally overpowered yet, but paperwork has been submitted. Next time we're going to continue with Limgrave, the Watchdog is still waiting, demi-human chieftains are out there, Mad Pumpkin Bro still needs attention, and eventually we will head south toward the Weeping Peninsula. The build's getting stronger, confidence remains dangerously ahead of it, and exactly where we want to be then. Alright people, go be awesome.